The tap on my door occurred shortly after midnight. Not the type of tap that one would anticipate in the middle of the night. Almost as if the individual was uncertain as to whether or not they should be present, the tone was soft and hesitant. I was reading a book that I had already read a dozen times while curled up on the settee with a cup of tea. I nearly convinced myself that I had not heard anything, as my residence was typically quiet at that hour. However, the subsequent tap was more persistent. I arose to respond and place my cup on the coffee table. The clock on the wall indicated 12:15 a.m., and I could feel a peculiar knot forming in my midsection. The possibilities were whizzing through my mind. Who could it be? I was not anticipating anyone, particularly at this late hour. Nathan, my neighbor, was present when I opened the door. Nathan, who was in his mid-40s, possessed a voice that consistently emanated an appropriate degree of tenderness and a kind smile. However, our interactions had been limited to exchanging pleasantries over the fence on a few occasions. He appeared slightly disheveled, his typical orderly attire now rumpled, and his eyes possessed an intensity that I had not previously observed. He apologized for the inconvenience, rubbing the back of his neck and shifting his gaze nervously to the ground. I merely required a conversation partner. I was taken aback, but I stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. Certainly, Nathan. What is the situation? I inquired, my tone becoming more gentle as I endeavored to interpret his expression. He hesitated briefly before slowly and deliberately entering the room. As he stood there, the living room, which was dimly illuminated by a few lanterns, appeared to be in a state of tenseness, as if he was at odds with himself. He began, his voice trembling, "I have been experiencing some difficulties. Things have been complicated." I was uncertain as to whom else to contact. We both sat down on the couch after I nodded, inviting him to join me. I was in a state of agitation, attempting to comprehend the reason for his visit to me. What could be so significant that he would appear in such an unexpected and unannounced manner? Before proceeding, he took a deep breath. I was uncertain as to whom else to contact. However, I have been contemplating the matter and have come to the conclusion that it is imperative that I articulate it aloud. I am uncertain as to whether I can continue to maintain the illusion that everything is in order. I was unable to respond as the weight of his words struck me, and I found myself retaining my breath. Nathan had always been known for his composure and ability to regulate his emotions. However, at present, it appeared as though he was in the process of disintegrating. "Nathan, whatever it is," I replied, my voice remaining unwavering. "It is unnecessary for you to retain it. You are permitted to inform me." He gazed at me at that moment, and for the first time that evening, his eyes appeared to soften, as if an invisible barrier between us had begun to dissolve. He paused to collect his thoughts, clearing his throat. "I am uncertain about how to articulate this," he began. "However, there is an issue that I have been grappling with. I have never disclosed this information to anyone." His voice trembled slightly, and I could discern the extent to which it cost him to articulate those words. As he meticulously positioned his hands in his lap, the air in the room appeared to shift, and his fingertips twitched slightly, as if he were uncertain about what to do with them. "I have been grappling with emotions that I am unable to suppress any longer," he acknowledged. "Additionally, they involve you." I was caught off guard and stared. I was not anticipating this. I was uncertain as to what to think or say. I could feel the pulse in my neck and my heart began to race as he spoke. Was this intended to be humorous? A misunderstanding? Or was there something more profound at play? "No, I do not." I was uncertain about the direction of the conversation, and my voice trailed off. I had always harbored affection for him as a neighbor, but I had never extended it beyond that. Certainly, we conversed. However, our conversations were merely informal. This has never occurred before. His eyes never left mine as he spoke again, his voice scarcely rising above a whisper. "I am aware that this is a surprise and that it may appear peculiar. However, there is a portion of me that has been resisting this for an extended period of time. I am resisting the notion of informing you, as I am adamant about not adding to the already complex situation between us." He paused, his gaze fixed on himself as he was absorbed in thought. "However, the reality is that I am unable to continue to deny my emotions. I believe I have been concealing it from myself for an excessive amount of time." The realization struck me slowly but with undeniable force, causing my breath to catch in my esophagus. There was more to this conversation than mere emotion-based discourse. It was something more, something visceral and honest that neither of us had anticipated. I experienced a variety of emotions, including a sense of surprise, confusion, and a small amount of dread. However, there was an additional element present that I had yet to identify. He added rapidly, his tone more earnest than before. "I am not requesting anything or crossing any lines. I simply needed to express it aloud, perhaps to establish its authenticity for a moment. Perhaps to determine whether you actually or could ever experience the same sentiment." The tension between us was so intense that it was almost tangible, and for an extended period, neither of us spoke. I could feel my heart racing in my chest as my mind attempted to comprehend the events that had just unfolded, and the silence seemed to linger indefinitely. There was uncertainty surrounding Nathan's admission, and I was uncertain as to how to respond. I could sense the gravity of the situation, as if it were the calm before a tempest, as the weight of his words was settling into me. I was uncertain about the direction of this conversation. However, one thing was evident. Our relationship would never be the same again. And despite my desire to maintain a sense of simplicity and to return to the security of the status quo, I was acutely aware that I could not disregard the events that were unfolding and the developments that had already begun. For what seemed like an eternity, the silence between us persisted. The tension in the room was so dense that it felt as though we were both trapped in a moment, unable to move forward or back. I could hear my pulse in my ears. Nathan sat with his hand still in his lap, unwilling to glance away from me. In a state of emotional turmoil, I was swept up. Confusion, surprise, and an even more profound, disquieting sensation. His words, which were both visceral and vulnerable, had unlocked a door that I was unaware existed. However, I was unsure of how to proceed. I swallowed forcefully, endeavoring to locate my voice in order to articulate a statement that would provide a coherent explanation for the events that had transpired. "Nathan?" "Indeed." I initiated the process. However, I was unable to complete the task. I was uncertain as to how to respond to the confession he had just made. "Is it possible for me to respond? Is there anything I could say that would not exacerbate the situation? Or was this something that simply required to develop naturally?" He must have detected my hesitation, as he promptly resumed speaking, his tone being both compassionate and urgent. "Really, I am not requesting anything. I do not wish to cause you any distress. I simply needed to express myself aloud, as I am unable to continue to bear this burden. In all honesty, I am unsure of what I am anticipating." He slightly shifted, leaning forward, and his eyes were filled with the familiar sincerity that I had always admired. "I was simply inquiring as to whether you have ever experienced the same curiosity. It is possible that there was a connection between us." And for a brief instant I was rendered speechless by the hum of his words. I had never considered the possibility, at least not in a conscious manner. Nathan had consistently been present, an amiable neighbor with whom I could converse in passing. However, what about this? This was unfamiliar territory. However, there was an undeniable allure to it. Something that caused my heart to race and my intellect to whirl in a dozen different directions. I eventually managed to communicate, albeit with a trembling voice. "Nathan, I am at a loss for words. I was not anticipating this. I was under the impression that you did not experience this level of emotion." I briefly averted my gaze in an effort to regain my composure and collect my thoughts. I had consistently perceived you as a friend and an individual in whom I could place my trust. However, what about this? This is distinct. It has the sensation of unusual. I could discern that my words were painful, and it was not a mystery to me that they were in stark contrast to his expectations. However, the reality was that I was unsure of how to manage this new reality, this change in the dynamic between us. Nathan said quietly, "I understand that it is a lot to take in." His voice was resonant with comprehension. Additionally, I am not currently seeking an answer. I simply felt the need to be forthright with you. There will be no more deception or concealment. I have the utmost reverence for you and our friendship. If nothing else, I would prefer that to remain unchanged. Although his words were mild, they were impossible to disregard due to their weight. It was evident that he had contemplated this matter for a significantly extended period of time than I had. However, I was uncertain as to whether it would be feasible to revert to the previous state. What if a situation had been irrevocably altered? Is there a possibility that I am not observing something? The prospect of investigating this, of investigating the potential outcomes, was both thrilling and apprehensive. However, I was not prepared to engage in any activity, particularly not without a clear understanding of my emotions. I required time. It is now time to determine whether I share the same sentiment. It is now time to contemplate the information that he has recently disclosed. "Nathan," I stated after a brief delay, "I am determined to preserve our friendship." My voice was firm yet gentle. "I truly do not. However, I require additional time. It is time to contemplate the implications of this situation. I am unable to provide you with an immediate response at this time." Although I could detect the slightest trace of disappointment in his eyes, he nodded and maintained a steady gaze. However, he refrained from disputing the matter. He simply gazed at me with that serene comprehension, as if he had been preparing for this very moment. He said gently, "I understand. I have no intention of departing. I will provide you with the time you require. Please refrain from isolating me, okay? Please refrain from allowing this to undermine the progress we have made." I was unable to help but admire his composed demeanor in the presence of such vulnerability. His capacity to accept my uncertainty with grace was unexpected, but it also provided me with a sense of security, as it allowed me to take my time without the burden of making a hasty decision. I murmured, my heart swelling with gratitude for the man seated in front of me. "Thank you. I assure you that I will not exclude you." The conversation's weight settled in the room like a heavy fog, and we sat in silence for a few moments. We now shared a silent understanding, a change in our relationship that was impossible for either of us to disregard. However, I could sense that something had changed even in the silence. Something profound, something that would influence both of us in ways that we were unable to comprehend at the time. Nathan eventually stood up, his movements moving at a deliberate pace. "It is likely that I should depart. It was not my intention to keep you up too late." I also stood, my mind continuing to race. I was concerned about his departure, but I recognized that it was necessary for him to do so. Space was required by both of us for contemplation. I expressed my gratitude for your honesty and for visiting, despite the fact that my emotions were still entangled. I also forced a smile. He smiled, a modest but genuine smile, before turning toward the door. "At any given moment. Maintain your well-being, correct? I will be available to assist you if necessary." And with that, he vanished. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, my mind whirling in 1,000 different directions. What was the significance of this? Was there an issue between us? Or was this merely a brief period of vulnerability that we would both eventually transcend? I was unaware. But one thing was certain. Things had changed, and I had a sense that my life and my relationship with Nathan would never be the same again, regardless of what happened next. The days that transpired subsequent to Nathan's visit were a peculiar interlude, as if I were traversing a precarious surface. Every interaction with him was tinged with an unspoken undercurrent, a delicate thread that dangled between us. I repeatedly replayed our conversation in my mind, questioning whether I had made the correct decision, whether I had been too hasty in requesting space and separating myself from him. However, I was unable to disregard the information he had disclosed. Our friendship had always been characterized by a subtle intensity that transcended mere neighborly pleasantries or casual conversations. It is possible that I had always been aware of it, but I had been hesitant to acknowledge its true nature. I continued to obsess over him as the week progressed, and I was ashamed to confess it. I observed minor details. The way his eyes softened when he gazed at me, the way his smile persisted a moment longer than it used to, as if there was something he wanted to say but was unable to. And each time we encountered one another, I could feel a glimmer of the same tension that we had experienced that evening, the weight of unspoken words that hung in the air. However, what was the significance of it all? I did not possess the answers at this time. However, I was certain of one thing. I was unable to continue evading the truth. I was unable to continue to deny that I was experiencing emotions that transcended mere friendship. I was compelled to confront it. I was required to determine the nature of this object and its potential meaning. Consequently, I eventually found myself standing in front of his door after days of contemplation. As I raised my fist to strike, my palms were clammy and my heart was pounding. This concluded the matter. The decisive moment. The door opened almost immediately, and there he was, looking as bewildered as I was. Nathan's eyes widened, and his expression was inscrutable for a moment. But a small smile tipped the corner of his mouth. His voice was genial and cautious as he said, "Hey, I was not anticipating your arrival. Is everything in order?" I nodded, but I could sense the words accumulating within me, attempting to escape. I was uncertain as to what I would say, but I was certain that I had to say something. "I have been contemplating," I began, my voice slightly trembling. "Quite a bit, in fact. Our background. Regarding the statements you made that evening. And I believe I have been evading the truth." Nathan did not interject. Rather, he observed me with the same patient, understanding gaze. His reticence instilled in me the fortitude to persist. "Nathan, the truth is I have been experiencing something as well," I stated, drawing nearer. "Something that I initially struggled to comprehend. I was uncertain as to whether I should allow myself to experience it or if it was merely a momentary occurrence. However, I have come to the realization that I no longer wish to suppress it. I hesitate to disregard it due to my apprehension regarding its potential implications. I have a greater passion for you than I ever imagined." His eyes were filled with a sense of relief, as if a burden had been relieved as his gaze softened. He tenderly grasped my hands, his touch being both warm and reassuring. He murmured, "I am pleased that you expressed that. This is something that I have been anticipating, but I have never intended to exert any pressure on you. I simply wish to be in your company, provided that you are prepared for it. I am interested in exploring the potential of this without any preconceived notions or urgency. We are the only ones who are collaborating to resolve the matter." I was unaware of the reason for the tears that welled up in my eyes. It was not melancholy. It was more akin to the realization that I had been suppressing my respiration for an extended period of time. I could now finally unwind. I was not the only one who experienced this. We were united in our pursuit. I murmured, my voice brimming with emotion, "I am prepared. I am receptive to discovering what the future may contain. In conjunction with you." Suddenly, the tension that had been accumulating between us dissipated. There were no extravagant declarations or spectacular gestures. Two individuals standing in the silence of the moment have elected to be candid with one another and to investigate a novel concept. In a single exchange, the uncertainty and dread that had weighed heavily on me for the past few weeks were lifted. I sensed the inception of something new in that calm, intimate moment. Something that is genuine. We stood there for a while, simply holding hands and relishing the tranquility that had been induced by this newfound comprehension. There was no longer a necessity for speech. We had already communicated all that was necessary, and it sufficed. After the evening had settled in, we proceeded to the couch, where we sat in close proximity without quite touching, allowing the intimacy of our presence to speak for itself. There was no urgency or stress. Two individuals, gradually and meticulously, are acquiring the skills necessary to navigate this new chapter of their lives in tandem. It was not flawless. It was a challenging endeavor. However, it was genuine. Additionally, this sufficed. The story's just beginning. There are more broken hearts and dark secrets ahead. Hit like, subscribe, and keep exploring with Love Missteps.